Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is Game 2 from the 2012 Fide World Chess Championship match. Going into this round, both players have a half point each, and this time Gelfand, with the white pieces, opens up with d4. Anand replying d5. After c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, we have both e3 and e6. So Queen's Gambit declines Semi-Slav, and now from here, knight to f3. These last two moves don't allow for these queen bishops to come out right away, and you may be wondering why that is the case. Oftentimes I'll emphasize this idea of getting it outside of the eventual pawn chain. So why is that maybe not going on in these cases? Well, on the white end at least, there's d takes c, and black could just try and hang on to that pawn. You know, they've given up the center, but white is now having to show compensation for being down a pawn. On the black side, if after, let's say, this e3 move, if black tries to go with bishop f5, it's not without allowing an eventual queen b3. Applying pressure to both d5 and b7 is very uncomfortable for black. So just a quick point regarding why maybe these guys stay put for right now. So e3, e6, knight f3, a6, not the most common move. Maybe the most popular being knight d7 to keep a close eye on e5. This right here, the e5 square, is going to be of great importance, as well as the e4 square. You'll see minor pieces directed, the bishops eventually directed to facilitate an eventual e-pawn push in the center. But a6 is a move directed at getting this b5 move in, and also a c5 move. What am I talking about? I'm talking about, let's say, should white play bishop d3, there is takes, b5, and after, I'm not sure where exactly the bishop goes, but c5 to follow. That's the main point. Since this pawn now has a defense, you get that quick c5 strike in, pinpointing the d4 pawn. I believe the bishop comes to one of these two squares. That's the main idea right here regarding the queenside structure, to get in b5 with the c5 follow-up. We don't have that. We don't have the bishop deploying to d3 right away. Instead, first we have b3, so that when the bishop does play to d3, and if d takes c is played, the bishop isn't going to be displaced. It could stay put on d3, staying on this nice diagonal, watching over e4. There could just be b takes c in response. Now, this is not without allowing something to be a bit uncomfortable for white, because after b3 this knight is unprotected, and with black's next move it's now pinned. So when you're in a situation where your piece is both pinned and unprotected, the natural reaction should be to defend the knight and break the pin. The only move that satisfies both conditions is bishop d2, and it's the only move. Going with bishop b2, just saying, you know what, I want to stay on this better diagonal, well, it's not without its drawbacks, and the drawbacks with such a move are as follows. Queen a5, pressure on the knight. Queen c2, there's now a third attacker, and the only way to add a third defender is to eventually reorganize these white pieces so that they're all watching c3. But queen takes a2 is available, and black is up a pawn. But it's more than that, because you know, it may seem like the queen is a bit misplaced right now, but soon enough the queens are going to be off the board, because what to do? Let's say bishop d3. Eventually there's just a serious amount of exchanges, and black is up a pawn in an endgame without queens right here. This guy needs a little bit more work, but so what? Black is up a pawn. So that's why we're not seeing bishop to b2, but rather bishop d2. This bishop move has so far been successful. That's the intention, to displace this queen bishop, force it to d2 before it is able to get to b2. And time is a great factor right here, because just running with the routine, let's say knight b to d7 or castle, does allow for this bishop to play here, and the queen to be supporting in time, and the bishop to come to d3 to watch out for an eventual knight to e4 move. So bishop b4, bishop d2, knight b to d7, more development, bishop d3, keeping an eye on that e4 square. There's no need to play to e2. There's not some crazy pin that's going to come about and cause white an inconvenience. This is the better of the two squares. Point right at the eventual kingside castle position on h7. There could be some tricks against that point at some later variation. So both sides castle, and now bishop to d6. Mission accomplished. It played to b4, did its job. Let's come back here because the next main idea is to get in a successful pawn break, and that will either take form with e5 or c5. Both of these minor pieces are in a position to facilitate those advances, but the one that's maybe more common to get in right here is this e5 move, since that's going to help out this queenside get completed with their development. Namely, this bishop wants to come out along this diagonal, so that e-pawn needs to move. So from here, rook c1, a purposeful move. This c-file can open up at any moment. You can also see on this move 10, queen c2, and just retaining this rook's flexibility. Maybe it's the d or e file at some point. Maybe, well, I'm not so sure about the e file, but the main idea is retain that rook's flexibility. Queen c2, purposeful, bearing down on h7, and this guy still has choices. So rook c1 instead, e5, and now we do have this c file opening up. C takes d, c takes d, and now e4. This is where things get pretty intense right here. I mean, it doesn't get too much more tense in the center when all four pawns, are battling one another, and there could be a couple different exchanges depending on whose move it is, of course. But e4, instead of e4, there is d takes, knight takes, bishop takes, but this is white has to be a little bit cautious here because there are possibilities for bishop takes on h2. I'm not saying right away. I think in this position, knight e2 is actually still an okay move. If there was this sacrifice going on, the king is needing to play to that g3 squares, otherwise queen h4 is deadly. So it actually would turn out to be okay here. Just showing one quick variation, it may seem a bit scary, but we could have, after queen check, the knight could block. Initially, I thought g5 is just going to get that piece back, but there's a nice shot just taking that bishop, and then there's either queen takes or king takes at some point. Queen takes being probably the better of the two. That's just one quick variation. There are others like h5. What to be doing exactly? Should that be played? But you could play around with that. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but the main idea here is that if this capture does occur, d takes e, this knight is able to capture, and this bishop, because it's able to support a knight to g4, that's why there might be variations where the bishop takes on h could turn out to be troublesome for white. Also, you'll note that when this sacrifice does come about, it's because this knight is no longer, this f3 knight is no longer. So taking on this e5 square, the knight recaptures. These two are in tension with one another. They're going to be off the board soon enough, and that's what allows for these possibilities against the white kingside. So we're not having that. Instead of c takes d, we have, well, after c takes d, we don't have d takes e, but rather e4, striking in the center, and now black replies with d takes e, and then knight takes e. We have a series of exchanges with these next handful of moves, and the position simplifies quite a bit. Instead of d takes e, we could also have this, but after knight takes, pawn takes, this is a jam-packed d file right here. I think it is still white who maintains a small edge here. It's a bit symmetrical. Let's say knight f6, bishop g5, and following suit, just getting more development in. The bishop backing up, looking for maybe some tricks along this diagonal or grabbing this pawn. White is still the better side, having this rook already on this half-open file. This is a possibility, but I think white has the better chance to really show or really put that small advantage to good use. We don't see that. In fact, I mean, if this does come about, black is the side that really does have to be cautious because of possibilities maybe against h7. There is not a knight yet on f6. Just showing a quick, short, just a short-winded combination here, and how things could really go wrong for black. If the knight were to play to that c5 square, hitting the bishop, you just back up, and let's just say something like b5 is played, looking to get this pawn. There's already just some tactics like this, you know, queen c2, hitting the bishop, hitting the pawn on h7, etc. White would just be winning right away. That's not going to happen, but I'm just trying to emphasize this idea of the different types of pawn exchanges and how that can help mobilize one another's minor pieces. And you know, you're maybe having to watch out for these little tactics as a result of the earlier pawn exchanges that were played in the center of the board. So what we did have in the game is d takes e, knight takes e, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and now knight to f6, putting pressure on this bishop. My first reaction was just back up and then maybe try for something along this diagonal, but the bishop would just get shut down if that was played. If bishop backs up, we're going to have e4. This knight needs to now find a new home. There really isn't going to be anything against h2. If anything, there's something against there's nothing going to be against h7, but rather h2 in this position. This knight needing to now find a new home. This maybe being the best, but things are certainly uncomfortable. I mean, it starts to become a position where the coordination on the white side is a little bit shaky. Bishop hitting the rook, rook having to come here, bishop here, the rook's getting kicked around. That right there, for these players, it's definitely a big red flag when there's possibilities to you know, have your own pieces become disorganized, or you know, not harmonious anymore. So after knight f6, we're not having the bishop retreat to b1, probably because of this e4 idea and then the kicking around of the white pieces. Instead, we have d takes e, knight takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn, bishop to e3, and the center, the smoke has cleared here. There's no more tension with any of the pawns. The queens are ready to come off, and there really isn't any imbalance to speak of. 3 versus 3, 2 versus 2. You know, just trying to do an endgame assessment right here. What's really going on? Where is there an advantage? There's really not an advantage. There's a situation, okay, after bishop f5, there's a situation now where you could very easily see an opposite color bishop ending as soon as these knights are exchanged. At this point, we have the queens come off, but again, as soon as these knights come off, opposite color bishops, even if one side is up a pawn or even two maybe, still tending towards a draw maybe. So we have the queens coming off, the knight does recapture, knight d4 hits this bishop, and black instead just runs forward with getting a rook on an open file, pressure on this bishop. After knight takes bishop, knight takes knight, we do have this knight for bishop imbalance, but you know, this knight is making things a little bit uncomfortable for this bishop. This is maybe the best home for this guy, but a knight on f5, okay, he's having to now go somewhere else to a square that's not supported by a pawn. Bishop c5 was the move played, boxing out that knight, and now we have h5, which is doing a couple things. This game finishes up in short order, but these last moves, I think, are important to emphasize here. This h5 idea is taking two things into account: flight square for the king, as well as maintaining the knight's position on f5 so that there's no g4 move kicking it away. This guy needs a home, and f5 is it. Rook d1, getting more pieces involved, getting the last piece involved here for black now with rook to c8. King f1, moving it towards the center. f6, preparing at some point for maybe a king f7 move. It's not good right away because of a check, and then, you know, that b pawn falls. But another thing with this f6 move is it's taking into account this bishop and you know, maybe one day it would like to be pinpointing G7. This structure right here is a good way to maintain control over these dark squares. You really don't want this bishop to get out of control. Having the pawns stay like this, having them staggered on G7 and F6 is perfect. So backing up, bishop to B4, and now king to H7. Again, you really can't come to F7 because of the check and the B pawn falls. So king H7 has its purpose, looking to still make king improvements, only, you know, going to H7 and only then G6. So after this bishop to B4 move, we do have now rook to C5, and there's really nothing more to do but shake hands, and this game ends in a draw because there's no significant advantage, just showing how things might have followed up. Rook takes, bishop takes. Let's say black tries to get active, and white says, not so fast, I want to just watch the bishop and hit the knight. Now we're seeing the reason for maybe this king H7 move played when it was. King to G6 is a nice way to meet the threat on the knight. There's no need to push this pawn. You don't want to weaken your dark squares. Get the king involved, keep this structure as is, and where do you really go from here? Let's say king improvement, rook improvement, watch over this pawn, the base points basically, and you're in a position to now just play knight to E7. Let's say the king steps up once more, knight here, and now this bishop has to take the knight, and the position is simplifying even more with you know, just the rooks and pawns. Again, nothing really going on here. 3 versus 3, 2 versus 2, something like this is certainly going to be a dead draw. But as it was in this game, after this move number 25 by white, rook to C5, this game ends in a draw. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care.